On January 24, 1991, at 4:45 p.m. in East Harlem, New York, 13-year-old Paola Illera arrived back from school and boarded the elevator of her apartment buildings to get to the 30th floor unit. However, during that brief moment, she abruptly went missing. As the sunset approached that fateful day, Paola's lifeless body was found by a bystander half a mile distant, about 3 hours following her disappearance. This discovery raised suspicions regarding the person responsible for Paola's abduction and demise among her neighborhood. So what had actually happened to her? Where had she gone from the elevator? Paola, along with her family, lived in East Harlem, also referred to as El Barrio, which is located in the center of Manhattan, New York City, and is well known for its unique fusion of customs, artwork, and community spirit. East Harlem is known for its diverse population that has deep Hispanic Latino roots. This is demonstrated by the vibrant festivals, food outlets, and street graffiti that beautifies the neighborhood. It is also home to the Museum of the City of New York, which showcases New York history. Based on statistical data, the probability of committing a crime is approximately 1 in every 22 cases, which is where her narrative began. Paola was welcomed into the world by Cesar and Olga Illera. She had 2 elder siblings, Julio and Alexandre. Born and raised in Colombia, Paola relocated to East Harlem, New York City, in June 1990, together with her mother and 2 siblings in pursuit of a better future. They lived at 420 East 111 St. on the 31st floor of an apartment complex. Paola resided with her uncle, Guillermo Ospina. Cesar, her father, kept up his cab-driving job in Colombia in order to eventually unite with his family in New York. According to her sister Alexandra, Paola joined junior high school '99 as soon as they landed in New York and was doing really well academically. Paola was characterized by her uncle as exceptionally smart and mature for her age. Her dream was to become a lawyer, and she had a lot of goals for the future. She did have a lot of friends, but not as many confidants at the school she attended. Alexandria claimed that she excelled academically because she spent her free time studying English and mathematics. Her mother admired her intelligence and said that she enjoyed discussing these subjects with her classmates, treating them as peers when they weren't in the classroom. Her uncle stated that Paola was very smart for her age and had an intellect much beyond her years. Something her uncle observed was that Paola felt contented in New York owing to her interest in the English language. Not only had he noted that, but also felt happy since he himself loved the English language. He continued, saying Paola was a bright girl with ambitions of her own. For Paola and her family, life initially seemed to be going according to plan, but then a tragic incident transpired, permanently changing their lives. Paola, then 13, left school early on January 24, 1991, and headed home via the same route she usually takes that lead to her apartment complex. As she arrived at 4:45 p.m., she used the intercom to call her mother, Olga, who answered and opened the lobby door for her. Nevertheless, this would be Olga's last conversation with Paola before she passed away in 1993. Paola passed through the lobby and got into the elevator, but she never made it to their flat on the 31st floor. 10 minutes had passed, yet Paola hadn't returned, which worried her brother and uncle. Something didn't feel right, so they decided to look for her. When they arrived at the lobby, they discovered it to be entirely empty. They looked frantically throughout the neighborhood. However, Paola was nowhere to be found. 3 hours later, at roughly 7:30 p.m., while out walking his dog, he came across a startling discovery. He found an unconscious body along the East River with drug-related stuff including lighters, syringes, and vials lying around. This unfortunate discovery turned out to be the body of Paola that was discarded there following her death, 36 minutes south of the apartment complex where she lived. At the crime scene, investigators were confronted with an extremely depressing sight. She had been stabbed once in the center of her chest. Once it was examined more thoroughly, it was discovered that she had a ligature around her throat, with very little blood dripping from it. There was no indication of who perpetrated this crime. The only items they recovered from Paola's body were some chalk in her pocket and a new Kids on the Block watch on her wrist. Paola's murder had a devastating impact over her loved ones as well as the whole community. Her mother, Olga, found it difficult to accept her daughter's loss. Students and instructors at her school were heartbroken. Teachers arranged sessions with impacted students, offering counseling to deal with their loss. Furthermore, due to safety concerns, everyone was cautioned not to stroll in that area on their own. In reaction to this incident, principal and county officials refused to engage with media and denied them entry to the school. There were a lot of unanswered questions for the investigators. They went door to door in the 32-story complex in search of witnesses who might have seen Paola in the vicinity where her body was eventually found. Sadly, they were unable to find any. Moreover, no clue as to who could have perpetrated this awful crime was present, so it was unclear if Paola's body was murdered somewhere else or at this location. As they conducted their investigation, the investigators uncovered a few specifics. They discovered that Paola frequently stayed after classes on Wednesdays and Thursdays to attend journalism workshops. On the day she lost her life, she was working on an article for a Valentine's Day present. Additionally, they discovered that Paola opted that she wanted to go to her family's apartment complex by herself after leaving school at 4 p.m. with another friend following her workshop on First Avenue. The two subsequently parted ways at 106th Street. Through their inquiry, the detectives discovered that Aaron Warford, another teenager, had also boarded the same elevator as Paola, but had asserted to have left at the 19th floor, whereas Paola stayed there. Therefore, investigators shifted their attention from him as a potential suspect. The full depth of Paola's ordeal was revealed by an autopsy. She'd sustained 3 stab wounds next to her heart, as well as assaulted and strangled. Apart from the medical examiner seeing this mark, Paola had also demonstrated incredible bravery by resisting against the assault whereby her assailant had to use force to split her legs, inflicting bruising on both thighs that mirrored his fingers. In addition, male hair were taken from Paola's body during an examination and were preserved as evidence. 4 months following her gruesome demise, on the 2nd of February 1991, Paola was buried in St. Michael's Cemetery in East Elmhurst, Queens. When her family moved to Flushing, New York, Victim Services was there for their support. Olga received consolation from Victim Services Families of Homicide Victims program. She, along with her family, hoped that justice would ultimately be served in Paola's case. However, as time went on, and justice appeared to be farther off than ever, their search for answers grew harder than ever. Anywhere in the world, and at any time, the murder of a 13-year-old child would have been a shocking headline. However, in New York 1991, it did not receive much attention. New York City reported more than 2,000 homicides a year between 1990 and 1992, with 6 bodies discovered per day throughout its 5 boroughs. The majority took place in poverty-stricken areas with a large minority population, like East Harlem, South Bronx, or Brooklyn's East New York. Regrettably, not many incidents similar to these were given substantial press coverage, as compared to the higher-profile cases that involve white or affluent victims located somewhere else other than East Harlem or East New York, Brooklyn. Due to a lack of media attention and political pressure, Paola's murder went unnoticed and unsolved for the most part of 1990s. Midway through 1999, New York City's crime rate had dropped, but in the housing projects of East Harlem, a concerning pattern of homicides and assaults of young teenagers had surfaced. 6 out of 7 of these incidents had been linked to Aaron through large-scale DNA evidence. During Aaron's fall 2000 hearing, prosecutors John Irwin and Richard Polanski combined witnesses and DNA evidence to put together a strong case against him. The prosecution presented 13 witnesses in total, 2 of which were victims. Meanwhile, Aron himself at first took the stand as his defense witness, followed by over 2 days of testimony. He showed a wide range of emotions during these sessions, from sobbing like a baby to chuckling like an 8th grader. In addition, he expressed his frustration at being tried, along with his contempt at being accused. His monologue, which was mostly heard without interruption by the jury, lawyers, or his own counsel, touched on a variety of subjects, such as pop culture, narcotics, rap music, problems with jail food, and thoughts on criminal justice systems. Before his trial started in 2000, Aron put up a thorough defense of his brutal serial abuse of teenager girls. He insisted that the police had plotted against him as part of a complex cover-up, which had been orchestrated by a medical examiner who was involved in organ harvesting and whom he suspected of being engaged in the illicit trade of human organs. He went so far as to claim that genetic shuffling was employed to alter his DNA. However, when the jury returned a guilty conviction on December 16, 2000, spectators burst out into cheers and relief. Aron swore angrily at the gathering of distraught family members as he was escorted past them. Upon his sentencing in January 2001, a month later, Aron's victims' families were given the chance to speak with him face-to-face. The mother of Paola, Olga, spoke to Aron face-to-face and expressed her desire for him to comprehend their suffering, which included restless nights, appetite loss, and incapacity to breathe or walk normally, lack of peace while remembering her daughters, and anguish on her passing. She conveyed her sorrow for bringing her daughter here from Russia to pursue American dreams alongside her. During his sentence hearing, Aron sobbed shamelessly while apologizing and admitting his guilt. Right then, a male cousin of Johannes Castro lost his cool and tried to jump over the barrier to take a direct hit at Aron. After that, Justice Joan Sudolnik announced her ruling. She imposed 4 400-year sentences for 4 counts of assault against Aron, in addition to 3 life terms without the possibility of release for each killing. Aron was subsequently transported to the Dannemora, New York-based Clinton Correctional Facility. Prior to Aron's sentencing, lawmakers in New York and numerous other states had approved legislation requiring DNA analysis for anyone caught in connection with serious offenses. Since then, the majority of criminal arrests, including those involving violent and nonviolent crimes, have been subject to DNA screening. Some jurisdictions have even started testing those who have been detained on misdemeanor charges. Olga is still grieving over Paola's tragic and untimely passing. She is aware that the pain brought on by such an abrupt loss never goes away, especially when there are still unanswered questions. As we follow Paola's tragic narrative, we wonder what motivates Aron to carry out such atrocities against society, and how society may identify and deal with these kinds of events. From the water surface of an isolated island appears a skeleton dressed up in a checkered shirt. The bones had washed up on Spencer Island, with little to no clues, starting a dark mystery that plagued the investigators for years. The remains were buried by the sheriff's office, alleging it to be a cold case. But as time passed, 44 years later, the man would be speaking from the dead, revealing his identity. Amid Marysville, Washington's quickly growing suburban environment on the coast of Spencer Island, a horrifying discovery was made in the late 1970s. This serene region, which is renowned for its magnificent diversity of shorebirds and ducks, turned out to be the unexpected site of a horrifying incident that would long haunt the Marysville community. As the locals congregated on Spencer Island, seeking solace in the tranquility that watching the birds offers, unaware of the horror that awaited him, a carefree duck hunter came upon the island's shore. It was early in the morning of the 3rd of January 1979. Following a week of below-freezing temperatures, on January 3rd, the air started to feel a little bit warmer. As a result, A few Marysville locals chose to spend some quiet time at Spencer Island. Among them was a desperate duck hunter who, despite the harsh 1979 winter, ventured into the deserted abyss for a hunt. He had absolutely no idea at that moment that destiny had something else in store for him. As he surfaced from the depths, he saw something that was almost unbelievable. A dreadful scene flashed before his very eyes. The enigmatic island's desolate tide pools were plagued by a spooky skeleton that resembled a Halloween decor, whilst caught up in a web of fishing nets. In the Snohomish River Delta, a 12-foot wooden piling along with a shoe, plus an unidentified leg bone, were discovered together in an unusual arrangement. Then a red shirt with a checkered design drew the hunter's attention. Subsequently, he made the shocking discovery of a skull, ribs, and another black leather shoe with a foot inside. The crime scene was no less than a horrifying puzzle that had to be completed. The hunter immediately reported what he had seen to the authorities. When officers showed up, investigators working on the case had examined the red, orange, gray, and white checkered outfits. 5 feet apart lay a human skull and a shoe that still had a foot in it. Investigators also found a belt of a size 33 or 34 and a size 8 pair of lace-up shoes, all while bearing in mind these heinous details. The O'Sullivan logo was engraved on the shoe's rubber heels. The label on the stack of khaki trousers said they were made in the USA. These findings revealed some info about the man's identity. They also found his leather wallet. However, it contained no money or identification. It appears that the victim had died several months ago. From the moment he was discovered, the sheriff's office designated the victim as John Doe, 79-1. The decay of the skeletal remains made it impossible to determine the cause of death. There weren't any dental records available at the time that could be compared to the body. A few months later, on March 15, 1979, the body was put to rest in Cypress Lawn Cemetery by the Cassidy Funeral Home. Back then, unidentified bodies were often buried since technology was still relatively new. Human remains weren't kept in the medical examiner's office until they were identified or claimed, because DNA technology wasn't as advanced back then. There was no way of identifying this body, because no one in the neighborhood had been reported missing. As the years went on, there was a decrease in the priority of identifying the body. The case was subsequently abandoned and forgotten. 2008 saw a team of investigators looking at the unsolved and unexplained cases in Snohomish County. Many such cases were solved as a result of the advancements in DNA technologies. In an attempt to identify and name the 1979 John Doe via DNA samples, the researchers decided to exhume the body. However, the full process may take years due to the examination itself and the respective documentation needed to obtain approvals for the excavation. Finally, the remains were retrieved from Cypress Lawn 7 years later, in 2015. The excavation was done under the direction of the Medical Examiner's Office and the Snohomish County Sheriff's Office staff. Years of effort and a ton of paperwork eventually led to this. After the remains were transferred to the Medical Examiner's Office, he was ultimately identified as the Spencer Island Doe. Forensic dentist Dr. Kyle Tanaka took radiographs of the Spencer Island Doe in 2015, mapped his teeth, and submitted the data to the National Crime Information Center in an attempt to identify the man solely from his teeth. The FBI's computerized database for criminal cases as well as cases involving missing individuals is known as the National Crime Information Center. It makes it possible for law enforcement agents from different parts of the nation who lacked jurisdiction to locate potential suspects or victims. But all of this effort proved to be fruitless. This unidentified body's teeth were unable to match. After being assigned the case in April 2016, Natalie Murray, a highly skilled forensic artist, managed to gather measurements, take photographs, and reconstruct the face of the Spencer Island Doe using sketches and drawings in less than a month. She used facial morphology as the basis for her reconstruction to provide an impression of the victim's real-life appearance. Natalie pieced together the face by fastening rubber pins to the skull in all the gaps. She then conjured up an image of him. His small nose and flat cheeks seemed to be typical of Asian faces. She drew him from the shoulders up, wearing the same red checkered shirt, so that you could visualize him around the moment of his disappearance. Basically, the idea was for someone to identify the face from the sketch. Natalie was working on the sketches at the King County Medical Office when Dr. Kathy Taylor, a forensic anthropologist from Washington State, analyzed the Spencer Island Doe's skeletal remains. Her analysis revealed that they might have belonged to a man, an adult Caucasian between the ages of 21 and 61, with a height of 5 feet, 2 to 5 feet 6 inches. The bones hadn't been fractured, but the leg's broken femur healed poorly. The femur is, in fact, the biggest bone in the human body. An X-ray revealed that the central part of the torso of the man protruded like an ice scraper's claw, causing them to be in continual discomfort throughout several years. The fact that detectives had never seen a fracture heal in this way led them to believe that the patient may have lived in a third-world country without access to health care, or may have decided not to seek medical help at all. Jane Jorgensen, an investigator with the medical examiner's office, was baffled by the scenario, as there wasn't any conclusive explanation. Even if the guy was homeless at the time of his death, it is unlikely that he would not have sought early medical attention, which is typically provided for free in many countries. It begs the question of why this man went through such excruciating pain and never spoke about it. The man additionally had 2 missing molars and 2 missing front teeth on his left side. The cavities for the molars appear to have been completely filled before his ultimate passing. When it was discovered that the guy had 3 teeth with alloy fillings and a gap in one of his teeth, indicating that he had sought medical services in the past, detectives were baffled as to why hadn't he gotten immediate treatment for his leg. The detectives were perplexed and confused about the events leading up to the man's life and subsequent death. Had he been subjected to torture? Given that inmates had access to dental care, officers speculated that he may have been a prisoner likewise. But why wouldn't anyone remember this man, especially since he would have been limping and maybe missing a few teeth? This person would have had to walk with a limp and may have been 2 inches shorter on one side as a result of the fracture. Did anybody not recall noticing a man walking around town with a limp? Following significant media coverage, a retired police officer from the 1970s informed the authorities that, while he couldn't recall the man's name, he remembered seeing someone limping in the town in the late 1970s. Access to healthcare records was made possible by this, however. There was still a great deal of ambiguity. He could have been a fisherman who drowned or was laid to rest at sea by his fellows. The University of North Texas Health Sciences Center provided a fragment of the victim's femur in September 2018. After that, it underwent more testing involving DNA extraction and was uploaded to CODIS, a database the FBI uses for identifying samples via forensic genealogy. In March of the next year, the institution succeeded in obtaining STR images and mitochondrial DNA. Nevertheless, the results were unclear, given that there were no matches. The officers didn't give up. They were simply required to find alternate means to identify the Spencer Island Doe. By 2018 and 2021, the Snohomish County Medical Examiner's Office investigators had ruled out several missing persons as possible matches based on a variety of factors, including dental records and short tandem repeat analysis. Meanwhile, in 2021, they started working with Othram to create an advanced DNA profile that may be utilized by investigative genetic genealogy to crack the cold case. Many unresolved mysteries have been successfully uncovered and resolved as a result of this collaboration. Othram Inc. received a part of the femur by January 2021, so that DNA could be extracted from it. All of this was funded by DNAsolves.com. in the hopes that technology would eventually lead to the identification of the John Doe from Spencer Island. Put another way, when the search was narrowed down from 1,000 people to 100, it made it much easier to pick out the potential relatives. May 2021 saw the successful generation of a DNA profile, and the amount of DNA gathered was suitable for forensic-grade genome sequencing. At last, the race of Spencer Island Doe was identified as Caucasian. A similar process is used by anyone looking to find long-lost relatives or research their own family's lineage. Through a lot of potential matches, the investigating detectives built family trees and narrowed in on a man who had disappeared in Everett, Washington, in the late 1970s. At last, John Doe from Spencer Island had been identified. His name was Gary Lee Haney. The 29-year-old disappeared in the late 1970s, but either no one filed a missing persons report or the paperwork was handled improperly. Either way, the skeletal remains belonging to the person have been identified owing to the DNA match with his half-sister. On February 10, 2023, the chief medical examiner officially announced the man's name as Gary Lee Haney. It took 44 years for the cold case to be finally resolved. Gary Lee Haney was born on September 23, 1950, to Bernice Schaefer, his mother. Bernice divorced Gary's father while he was still a youngster and remarried in 1955 to Sheldon Lee Haney, an Air Force officer. Gary's stepfather adopted him and legally changed his middle name. This young man had the opportunity to travel the world with his parents. Gary was said to have had superb eye-hand balance while playing piano, and was a fan of the rock band, the Beatles. Thane, Gary's 71-year-old cousin, helped piece together a range of memories and information about Gary's life. He kept all of the large-scale scattered family records. A few monochrome images portrayed the dark-haired Gary holding a big dog's leash. His stepfather is well-dressed and his mother is alongside him in an elegant dress. The pictures describe the boy's life, one of which is a picture from his school. The family moved from Kansas to New York. Every year the family got together for a celebration, but the Haneys were never present. Thane remembers vaguely that Gary used to behave a little bit odd due to some mental disorder. The boy experienced active hallucinations as an adult. These could have been brought on by autism or schizophrenia. When Gary was 16 years old, his biological father, Joseph Condomiti, passed away in the Veterans Hospital in Missouri. 3 years later, his mother died too. Gary Haney had also never met his half-siblings. In addition, after the death of Gary's biological parents, his stepfather finished his military duty and started working for Boeing as a commercial pilot. Sheldon Lee Haney lived in the Everett, Washington area from the early 1970s to until at least 1990. Since Gary's stepfather was the only surviving family he had, it's possible that he resided with him. Following his retirement, Sheldon Haney lived a nomadic lifestyle. Therefore, it's clear that he didn't have much responsibility. Maybe the weather was too harsh for the man. Could it be that Gary was living on his own? Then Thane remembered that sometime in the mid-1980s, his uncle had paid him a visit in Texas. He never mentioned or made any contact with his nephew Gary. Gary was living in a boarding home, per some documents, and he died on Christmas Eve of 1976, according to Social Security. Nonetheless, that claim was disputed because there were no living family members who had listed him as deceased. Investigators speculated that there might have been an argument between Sheldon and Gary, or that Gary might have moved out himself. Regardless, Sheldon Haney was unable to find his grown-up stepson. It should be noted, though, that written record-keeping was not as thorough back then as it is today. A missing person complaint was not found by the recent detectives who investigated the case. Consequently, it's possible that the papers were misplaced before their computerization. In 1997, Sheldon Haney passed away, leaving behind no trace of his stepson's whereabouts. Even after so many years of thorough investigation, there was still no concrete evidence that foul play was involved. This led the detectives to the conclusion that Gary may have drowned near the location where his body was found, or he may have been carried away by the river current and ended up there. The exact cause of death is still unknown, with hypotheses ranging from drowning to a skull injury or an underlying health problem. Apart from the photos from their early years, Thane has no idea what his cousin looked like in adulthood. He intended to build a memorial or headstone in the location where Gary's body was found. It appears that the answers to this case have only led to more questions after 44 years of twists and turns. What specifics are known about Gary's demise? There was no hit and no established cause of death. At least there is a name for the Spencer Island Doe and a resolution of some kind. If you find this video compelling, show your support by giving it a thumbs up, subscribing to our channel, and ringing that notification bell. By doing so, you'll stay updated about the latest investigations and mysteries. Your support means the world to us as we continue to pursue the truth in the world of unsolved cases.